guys watch something interesting on New Year's Eve. For reasons of everybody was sick, New Year's Eve was a little later this year, like halfway in February, so we went to see The Lost King, which is a British movie. It's one of those things I chose it because I saw like two little things of information and said, yeah. It is a very British movie. To the point that I'm going to say, I was thinking about it afterwards, so that for a non-British audience, it is actually leaving out things because they expect you to know stuff. It's a BBC production. It came out in the cinema. We saw it there, and it tells the story of a modern lady who got impassioned of history. And there is a mystery in history. If you're English and you know your history, you know this mystery. The question is Richard III, villain, and because that's the propaganda for many years, like hundreds of years. Richard III is the arch villain of English history, and upon closer inspection, this lady found out, and it's not new for the people who knew it, that may not be so. And this sort of is the story of what happened after that, because not only is he arch-villain, he is also, they don't know where he physically went, and they know from everybody else. They know where they physically went after they...
And with everybody you mean?
All the kings of England, all the crowned heads of England, they know where they are, or they know why they are not to be found anymore. But they know where they are, except for this one. So that's why he's the lost king, because his remains are lost. So this movie sort of divides itself up in sort of three main plot lines. So the Richard plot line it divides up into his remains now in the now world, and excavations and stuff like that, and archaeology, and the other story of his is this past, this arch-villain bit, and how that relates to actual facts. And the third one is an interesting plotline where you sort of go, is the plotline of the lady herself who has chronic fatigue syndrome. One of the interesting things about this movie, it is kind of a biography, but it's a biography of an event more than it's a biography of a person. So this is not really about her. It's about her setting stuff in motion so that the remains of Richard can be found and how that happened. But it's also a little bit about her. Because it's a real story, this is real events. But the way they depict it here is this lady actually has a job, and she goes there and she has problems because of the chronic fatigue. And other than actually having an issue, a physical issue which limits you, she is also being limited by other people because she has that issue. And the way they depict the chronic fatigue is complicated because I have chronic fatigue. I know what it's like, and I don't see what she's doing as what my interpretation, my experience of it. The only thing I did see as similar is how she was passed over at work for having a problem. They sort of pass her over as a matter of course because she has the problem. I've run into that as well, but it was not because of chronic fatigue. It's because of dyslexia and stuff like that. So I've seen that happen, and it's a sort of a general being passed over because there is an perceived issue or an actual issue, but an issue that the other people don't know how to deal with it other than just passing you over. But it's not particularly chronic fatigue, and it's basically practically the only thing they do with the entire plot line is that plot point. They'd also have her at one point just run out of steam, which, yes, it happens, but the way it's depicted there is not at all the way it happens to me. I will probably say that chronic fatigue is maybe a collection of things that are sort of grouped together, so there may be different ways people deal with it. I mean, there may be different ways that people experience it. I don't know. Yeah, the plot line of the excavations, it's interesting because I realized that when I was looking at a American bit of historical documentary, and I was sort of going, oh wow, that style is completely different from the BBC, or I watch Dutch documentaries and BBC documentaries, English documentaries. English documentaries have a very definite style, and also information. And this movie, because it is not a documentary, it's not a docudrama, it is an actual drama, and it assumes that you have the knowledge base of the locals for which it is meant, which is Brits. And so when they come to excavation, the guy just says, oh, we're going to put in a trench here and I put in a trench there, and they sort of gloss over the entire archaeology bit because everybody in Britain knows about this, because Time Team, 14 years of Time Team every week on your television, where they show you with real experts how these things are done. Everybody in Britain knows that when you talk about a trench, of how it is done, where you can do it, how precise they have to be. You don't have to put it in the movie, because everybody knows. And I was going, but if you're not British and you've not been watching Time Team religiously for 14 years, yeah. And I think even the fact that Time Team existed, because these events happened in 2012, and this film is like this last year. Time Team was going in 2012. Everybody was interested in archaeology. This show was so popular. They had live broadcasts of digs in York, which is actually the hometown of Richard. He came from York. Digging up medieval stuff of roughly his period. Not him, because he's not there at all, but places he would have been in. And so this lives in Britain, and so you don't have to spend any time talking about it. They spend most of the time talking about on how to figure out where to go look for something. Because coming back to Richard himself, he was king at the end of the War of the Roses, and it ended with a big battle, and he was defeated and killed, and supposedly either left for dead, or thrown in the river, or possibly buried somewhere. And they were hoping for buried somewhere, because lost in the river or just dumped, that's why he was lost. Everybody for many hundreds of years, for 400 years, thought that he was just dumped in the river, and then it's a lost cause. But if you get like sightings of people saying in 15, because these events happened in 14 in the 15th century, so if people in the 16th century say, after the dissolution of the monasteries, the churchyard became part of my garden, and I kept it and I didn't touch it, and and then these people's children and their children's children, and like many hundred years, and people that haven't touched it and just paved it over and put a car park on top of it. And the weird thing is that this actually happened. This is exactly what happened. And so they have to figure out where to dig. And not only do you have to figure out where to dig, you have to figure out precisely where to dig. And that is what they spend most of in the film trying to explain. And Richard himself. And I think this is why this is a drama and not a docudrama or anything like that. But the BBC is excellent at making docudramas and having like do a scene and then have people talk about it and stuff like that. This is not it. And you can tell because this lady who is looking for Richard, thinking about Richard, living with the idea of Richard in her head so much that he becomes real in a not in a physical real sense, but she has a conversation with this person of history, and because it's a drama, you can show that by showing somebody. And I like it really very much that right at the beginning she starts with the Shakespeare play, which is the worst type of propaganda against Richard ever written. She goes to the play because her son has to go to the play, and she sort of takes the image of the actor to be the image of her ghost's companion, her talking companion. And I thought that was cool because it's just shows that it's her inner dialogue. It's not anything real. It's just her inner dialogue, her visualization of him. Yeah. This is so British. Yeah. Peanuts? Peanuts saw it too?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Well, we should do this. No, that's not right. No, no. Okay, let's do that again.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
That's better.
Right. So I was thinking in terms of the Richard was misunderstood. She is being misunderstood. Richard was not heard. She is not heard.
No. By
her husband. A little bit by the kids, but
the
kids are kids. So that's that's not on them, but by society work. And she actually holds her own, considering that she has a debilitating condition.
Yeah.
I agree that it did not look convincing, but like you say, everybody has their own experience. Yeah. And it's a very nebulous diagnosis anyway. Yeah. Because they don't really know what they're diagnosing.
And I think because I didn't say that earlier, but I'm not sure that the actual author, because the actual lady is actually just an author and she was just researching and then she wrote a book.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if chronic fatigue is actually attached to her, but the interesting thing is that the lady who plays the author looks in absolutely no way as the author. She's not meant to represent her, obviously,
because
it's a
character.
Basically the only things they have in common is they're British and they're ladies. That's it.
Women. Well, so throughout the film, the relationship with the ex-husband starts to become closer. You don't get to see whether or not they actually get back together, but he's certainly taking a lot more interested in the kids, and he already was. He was being a good a father of the family, ex-husband style, and at no point does he tell her to not get into this stuff, because most of the people around her are kind of like, what is she into? It's not too over the top, but she doesn't really mention it to people. And then she finds that group of fans, Richard fans, and they've all already pieced out little bits of information, and she starts putting it together. And because so I like it because it's a detective story, effectively, with a lot of different twists. And the detective story as well, it's a very cold case. This is a super cold case. But she's not only finding Richard, but she's also redeeming him.
Yeah.
Because she's proving some certain parts he couldn't have. And I don't know how she proves it, but certainly it comes down to he could not have killed the two princes and these kinds of things.
It's actually not quite. But what the big problem that Richard in history had is that right after him came Henry VII, and Henry VII is the grandfather of Elizabeth of England, who was, and Shakespeare was,
and Henry VIII.
Shakespeare was under Elizabeth,
so
he was basically giving Richard a hatchet job, completely vilified him to the point.
He had to do what was politically required of him.
Yeah, whereas the specific thing that he's most accused of, which is the death of his nephews in the Tower. The problem with that was that he had already discredited his nephews as being illegitimate, and so they were therefore no threat to him. And the only person who they were a threat to was somebody who was from an even more illegitimate line, which was Henry VII. So,
this is kind of in the place, but they gloss
they gloss over Henry VII in the place altogether, and they just completely vilify Richard. And he's not going to be a model citizen in any way, shape, or form. He's just not any worse than anyone else at that time.
Well, he's a very good fighter.
He was excellent for somebody who has a very strong deficiency in his spine. He had a scoliosis, which is a S bend of the spine in that direction, whereas you should have, this should be straight. If you're sideways, it should be a little bit of bend, but hold on.
In the wrong.
Yeah, so he had an S bend in his spine, and they found, that's why they could verify him when they found him, that it was him because of the scoliosis or the deficiency, and a DNA lineage test from other fans who there are a lot of royalty fans in England.
But they in the movie the DNA testing does go through the universities, and they do verify.
Yeah, everything is verified.
In the end, it's literally verified.
Proper.
Not just this is a skeleton that could be him. No, it bloody well was him.
As far as you can verify somebody that back,
that's how they presented
it is somebody who is of the lineage of Richard, and he has the same type of head wound or wound on his body that you would expect from somebody who died in the way that he's reputed to have died in battle. They killed him in battle. So he had a wound. He had a deficiency, a spine deficiency, and he is genetically deformed. Yeah, the scoliosis, and he is genetically related to the line. So it should be him. So for an archaeology point of view, this is enough evidence to accept that this is Richard. He's buried in a plot on a churchyard, and I'm not quite sure if he's actually in the churchyard, but they weren't sure if he would be in the church.
Outside the church wall.
Yeah, and they weren't sure if he was going to be inside because he had already been discredited, and like history said, he may have been thrown into a ditch because he was that.
In which case we would have been a lot more screwed when we found him.
Yeah.
So this is better.
This is much better. But as a royal, he should have been, or a royal or a noble, he should have been buried inside the church, and he wasn't. He's probably, I think he's probably buried outside the church.
They said it was outside the church wall.
And so they dug the two trenches because one was inside the plot of the old church, just the plot. The church is long gone. And the other trench was in the space that was outside, and just hope that it's right. And they got lucky. Yeah. They got so lucky. Lucky enough to make a movie about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool story. I remember when the documentary came out of the king in the car park. And that's just, it swept, I assume it swept over everybody, at least in this part of the world. It was like, what? I mean, that's a discovery for the ages, right?
And it's completely because they've been digging around England so much, but even the field on which Bosworth Field, on which the battle took place, where Richard was killed, was actually lost for a while because they wasn't sure where it was.
Yeah.
It's 400 years ago. It's a long time. More than 500 years ago. It's a long time ago.
It's amazing.
So you have this amazing story, and it's and making because they already done the documentaries about it. They talk things about it. They done everything about it already. A book was written. Now make a drama about it, and I think this is the way to make a drama about an event like this. To give it a little bit of imagination with the Richard personification there.
Well, the other part of the drama was her fighting against the established academia. First, they wouldn't give her money. Well, that's fair.
Everybody wants to dig in England, so yeah.
The crowdsourcing, the crowdfunding, and I was like, no, she's like, this, we hope it's going to give us a couple of £100 or whatever it is, what she said. It was like, and I was like, no, everybody in England, everybody in the US, everybody in Canada, everybody in Australia, everybody that is slightly connected to the English language and the history of England, and they're anywhere interested in, like, press button, I'll fund that one, because that's so cool.
Because now that even though Shakespeare vilified him, there is a beautiful play. Well, beautiful. There is a play about him. He's been put on stage as much as Hamlet has been. You know,
he's the version with Benedict Cumberbatch. He's one of the most kick-ass. I mean, the whole thing is full of kick-ass actors and characters, but that stands out. And
so this as a king, he is actually one of the more interested in more living in the imagination. Yeah. But even as a villain, at least as a villain, you want to find him.
Shakespeare did that for him.
At least Shakespeare did that for him. But the interesting thing is, and I was thinking about that, because Richard was vilified in his own time to the point that he disappeared. Tutankhamun, King Tut, was also vilified in his own time to the point that he disappeared. And that's why we have him now. And that's why we have Richard now. Because a lot of the other kings, especially earlier kings,
we know
then when there was a king, or when there was a king after who hated him, just made their bones disappear. Because nobody knew where he was. Well, he was safe.
That's what I figure is like the first Richard. Just Richard, not Richard. I guess Richard the First later on.
That's
Lionheart, and Eleanor of Aquitaine, his mother, and Henry II, his father. They're all buried in France.
We've been there.
We
were there.
Rouen.
No.
We'll put it here somewhere.
Yeah, but we were there.
But is buried? They're buried there, and they have these large. Stone things that are carved out, so you know where they are. Yeah, that we know where they are, and therefore it's lively as well in the children's storytelling. But it's like, Richard the Lionheart goes to fighty. Now, of course, that would be politically way incorrect, but he goes fighty.
But somebody like Becket, who's also an important figure, but we know that with the dissolving of the monasteries, his bones were disappeared. So we know, but we know that we don't know why we know that he's gone.
We know why we don't have him.
Yes.
Yeah. And we should have him.
And Richard, he was just forgotten and completely considered uninteresting. Yeah. And that's why we have him. Or the Lord Mayor who had him in his garden for a couple of hundred years and didn't do anything about it. After the dissolution of the monasteries, he just left it alone and just marked it as saying King's Grave. He marked it with a little folly maybe, and then later, of course, the whole thing got bulldozed, and then the carpark went on top. Yeah. But because it was a garden before, it didn't become a building. If it could become a building, it would have been gone. Yeah. But there were already houses around the space that was the garden now became a carpark.
Look for an open space, and I'm thinking, really, over 500 years.
Oh,
and
yes.
people don't know where
yes.
it is.
Oh, yes.
Really?
Yes.
It turned out, yes. Yes, really.
Time. And if you're a good fan of Time Team, and
I watched like 2 episodes.
The oldest things in England that are still there are actually the Roman setup of towns, roads, and where the houses are.
In Central Europe as well. You have the Roman roads. Yeah.
If it's only 500 years ago,
Yeah.
if there was a house there before and it, for whatever reason it burns down, you build it there again. You don't build it next to it. You don't build it in the open space between the houses because that is an open space that people use. So that's where you're looking for the open spaces. You're looking for the marketplace and you're looking for... Because it was a church before. The church was torn down and you put a big house on top of where the church was or a building. And
so
then
next to the church, the space is open.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, if he'd have been buried inside the church, it would have gone nowhere.
Well, it depends. Sometimes these churches were actually not demolished as in the way we demolish stuff now. They just leave them to...
And build on top of it?
No, you take it apart. You take it apart, you take the stones elsewhere and you build something else out of it. But all the while it's a quarry and it's therefore in open space. And that's why it's the other part, the open space. So you get... That's why I look for open spaces. Yeah. Because you were looking for churchyard or church, but the churchyard comes with the church. So you're still looking for an open space.
Yeah. I want to come back to the academia because in the end, I mean, there's a couple of points where she says yes when she should have said no. When they're suddenly totally interested in her because there's money coming in and there's press, then the academia guys, yes, they're men and she's a woman, and that's not by accident, I think. And they just jump in front of the camera and they take the media and they're saying, we found this and this is my research, and she's just sitting there going, but really she missed every single opportunity that she could have taken to say, you come with me, this is what I did. And then one of the things that one of the academic guys does is said, oh, and I just filed for such and such, so that if in the unlikely event that we find something, then the credit or whatever it was goes to the university. Whereas actually she had funded most of the thing.
I did look.
And they wanted to stop doing it. So I was like, that I don't like that. And in the end they pushed the point through by the big press conference. She's not there and she's going into a school building and going to talk to the kids about finding Richard. And I think that it's either saying, listen, women, you really need to speak up, because otherwise this happens. You know,
they will bulldoze over you.
They will bulldoze over you, but it's not saying how to do it. They're saying, hey, women get bulldozed over, so get used to it. So that part I didn't like. I really feel that there could have been either the husband... No, and I don't mean that because he's a man, but that would be a person in her corner, or the group. They could have done the "I'm Spartacus" thing. They could have all showed up. I was expecting her to show up with the fan club, but no.
My cursory glance at some of the press around this movie is that some of that is not what happened. So how that worked out in reality, I don't know.
I didn't research it at all.
Like I said, she
reacting to the movie.
The original lady was actually a writer, and she wrote the book. And this is a dramatization of an event, and not all of it is what actually happened.
I would also say the other thing is that they're kind of implying that if you have something fun in your life that you're really passionate about, your chronic fatigue goes away.
Yeah.
And I would like to also go, that's bullshit.
You push through for a while, but...
she will crash afterwards. She will be down for like 2 years, but she will be smiling. Because she actually did something, but that doesn't mean that there's no repercussions.
Yeah, the chronic fatigue, if you're living it with something like that a long time, you have to say at some point, I'm going to do it despite the fact that this
I
is a
will
problem.
hurt afterwards.
I will hurt afterwards.
During, but I will do it.
And this is one point that they didn't make, which they could have done with Richard because of his scoliosis. But the documentary that, of course, is not related to this movie, but is also BBC. I believe it's a BBC documentary. The one with the king in the car park, or it's one of the other ones. They actually had a medical people look at this of how it would be, and they got somebody, because they were wondering, how can a person with a scoliosis this bad, so this curvature of the spine, which actually pushes your lungs all the way wrong, and it probably it's not going to be comfortable. This Richard was known to be a skilled fighter, fierce fighter in battle. He won battles.
In the Shakespeare, he is extremely fierce.
Yeah, and that is actually realistic. That happened. So the modern people were wondering, how can this be? And they looked for somebody who has a scoliosis of that sort, and they found a chappie. Who was actually the son of a of a medieval reenactor. So,
wow, that's ideal.
Ideal.
Can't get any better than that.
And they got him proper armor for the type of what Richard would have, fitted and properly. They did everything properly, hoisted on a horse, and then tried to see how much movement he had. And he said, the support of this particular armor, the way it is done, actually supports me enough that I actually get more space up here to do these things. So yeah, it's possible. But this movie doesn't go into the Richard, person with a problem. No. This is strong Richard. The only problem Richard has in this one is the hatchet job that Shakespeare did on him.
Is his reputation.
His reputation is.
But I think the parallel between her and Richard is that they both have an ailment that is difficult to deal with. It is no cure. But
they don't do anything with Richard.
But they don't do anything with her chronic fatigue either. So
they give it one scene.
Yeah. And so they probably, I think that's the writing thing, is that they decided, okay, she's going to mirror him. I also liked that he shows up as a spirit Richard, and she talks to him. It just makes good cinema.
And then he's the Shakespearean actor. He's not actual Richard.
And the responses are clearly like, it's only what she is thinking. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah.
So
the last thought about the chronic fatigue is, I think that's because BBC is not like a regular film company. They have they're funded by public money, so they have a charter they have to do. They have a list of things they must do, and one of the things is do things that add to humanity, if you know what I mean. So diversity and all that kind of things, they do all of that. And this, I think, the inclusion of chronic fatigue at this point, which may or may not be related to the writer, to the writer lady, I don't know, is to put that in somewhere, because it's not anywhere. This is the only thing I've ever seen about chronic fatigue. Yeah, it's not the best thing.
I remember 30 years ago or something like that, and I saw in a Dutch TV series, and I can't even remember which one it was, a woman and there was kind of like a love story happening, but she wakes up and she has this migraine, and the guy, love story thing, he goes out and does his day, and she takes a shower, and you see her having a migraine. I'd never seen that before. You never see that. And this happens to people. This is normal.
Yeah, and there should be more of that.
And it was just and the whole story wasn't about that. That was just, they were now together, and this is so it's insane that there's not more of then going, and that person is dealing with diabetes, and that person is dealing with a leg that doesn't work, whatever. And I think BBC should be a lot more of that.
BBC did put that in a little bit heavy-handedly, because now that you know that they need to do that, you see that that's what they did. They just put it in here.
Heavy-handedly as in clumsily, because it's not actually, it doesn't resonate with those of us that know stuff about it. So at least they put that. It's a step one of very, very long
And I would have liked it if they'd connected it maybe more with the scoliosis of Richard. It's not the same thing.
Because it's just sitting here that I realized that, hey, that is the parallel that they were doing.
And they didn't do it.
And then if you're going to be heavy-handed, then okay, throw it out there. And then she says, I feel connected to Richard because he wasn't hurt, because he had an ailment, because this and that, and I'm not being hurt and I have an ailment. So they could have done that. It wasn't really that kind of a movie because it was very introspective.
These criticisms that I have of this, I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah,
it was really.
Go watch it. It's very good.
It's in a feel good.
Anybody can watch it.
It's a feel good, but not in a saccharine or Christmassy kind of way. It's a very. This is life, people going through life and being impassioned for a project and then seeing it come to fruition.
Yeah. With a little bit of a message of if you follow your passion, then, or you create. I don't really believe in if you follow your passion, your life everything will fall into place, because that's bullshit. No,
but at least you
very,
will,
very hard.
At least you will have done something that you thought was worthwhile.
It's worth doing, but her life does come together better throughout the film.
Yeah. And that's the film, because the lady was already a writer.
Yeah.
And she did research, a lot of research.
Oh, yeah.
And to much success.
Yeah.
So...
Is that your opinion?
It is my opinion.
And that's my opinion.
And we're sticking to it.